If you're like me and you have at some point wondered why so many people start out in the personal finance world, graduate eventually into these other things, it's because it's all kind of connected. When your life is not completely obsessed with work, you still have energy, you still have attention span, and you start to look inward. And in that moment, you start to say, I wonder how I can apply all the excellence and the creativity and the work ethic that I apply to my life over here and like put it over here. And I wonder what would happen to my life or to my health. And I think it's just a bit of a natural process. And I think that's kind of where we are, which is very Welcome to the Rich and Regular podcast, where we explore life at the intersection of money. I'm Julien.
And I'm Kirsten. And today we're talking about being sober curious and sharing some lessons from our 3-year journey to drink less.
3 years?
Yeah. It's been that long, right?
Wow.
I know.
Okay.
But first, I want to say thank you to Annie. Annie left us a 5-star review that said, "Love this podcast, so informative and full of information you can really implement in your financial life, and always presented with thoughtfulness and the understanding that we're all in a different place with our money. I look forward to hearing Kirsten and Julien every week," but really just Kirsten. She didn't say that last part. But
I was about to say.
That's what she meant. I know that's what she meant.
I was about to say, thank you so much, Annie, but she ruined your review.
I just took some creative liberties. Thank you, Annie. We really appreciate it. And thank you for noticing the nuance that we try to approach these topics with.
Yeah, much appreciated.
Important to us. All right, so let's dive in. This episode is a little personal. I'll probably have a little bit of a vulnerability hangover when we're done, but we wanted to talk about it because, like I said, it's been a multi-year journey for us, but this year something clicked. And I gotta say, it has honestly been the best financial decision that we've made all year, to me, bar none.
I don't know that I would say that.
We have saved so much money.
We have saved a lot of money, but the best financial decision we've made all year is
It's a big superlative.
Bold statement. I think for me, it was the most surprising financial benefit, if you will, for sure. It wins that award for sure. And again, this is coming from someone who is aware of that, someone who can do math and understands kind of how that all works. But I was still genuinely surprised when we kind of added it all up and said, wow, that's really, really interesting and on par with some of the things that we've heard other people who've gone through this journey do. So I thought that was really, really cool. So let's jump right into it, right? Because I think the first key thing here is to just highlight that we're not alone. We're not the only people that have been on this sober, curious journey. If you're listening out there and you're one of those people, I'm willing to bet that there are people who are listening to this right now and saying sober, curious. I didn't even know that
it's a new term.
That was a thing, right? So there it is. Right off the top, there is a word for this, and it's called sober curious or sober curiosity. A couple of stats for you that I thought were interesting. One was that nearly 40% of Americans now follow this sober, curious lifestyle. 2, in terms of how this manifests itself in terms of actual numbers and sales or revenue for the alcohol or spirit industry. Alcohol sales are down 4.1% for the first half of 2023 in the United States, and high-end top shelf products are actually down double digits.
Wow.
So people who have a taste for
bottle poppers.
The fancier things are not buying those things nearly as much as you used to. This is also a much larger issue than just in the United States. This is a global, I shouldn't call it an issue, but it is a
Phenomena,
a movement, something that is happening, whatever you want to call it. It is also global, right? So if you can think about the role that Europe even plays in the minds of a lot of Americans, where there's a very casual and free-flowing relationship with joy and having fun, and the role that alcohol plays in that. Well, Europeans are also seeing a decline in alcohol sales as well. And certainly when you look at it from a generational standpoint, I know a few episodes ago we spent some time talking about Gen Z, and they're showing up here as well as really kind of being at the forefront. I mean, millennials are behind them in this regard, but Gen Z is really leading the effort here in drinking significantly less than previous generations. Studies show that the percentage of Gen Zers, I struggle with calling them Zoomers.
Zoomers.
10% fewer Gen Zers were drinking alcohol in 2022 than they were in 2003. Right. So there's a huge dip there with them. And we've not seen that decline for any other group. And so, hey, shout out to those guys for leading the way and showing us older Zennials a different and potentially better way of life.
Yeah, I like how Gen Z rolls, man. I mean, Gen Alpha is probably my favorite generation, but Gen Z, man, they hold no punches. They're like, you really shouldn't be ingesting poison.
Listen,
like, it's that simple for them.
It's just an idea.
Just to add a social and cultural lens, there's also a theory from experts as to why sober curiosity or being more mindful of your drinking is growing in popularity. And the theory is that it's because it's a new status symbol.
Okay.
So sober curious people are going to join the ranks of vegans, CrossFitters, people who never carry cash, Tesla owners, just general cultural status symbols.
Yeah.
And it makes sense because in our Puritan, Protestant-based country and culture, abstinence from anything has always been seen as a virtue. So that tracks. But I really think it depends on where you're from and who you're around, because there's plenty of subcultures or even communities that still view very healthy and mindful choices as selling out or weak. They don't see it as this status symbol. It's kind of pointless to them. So I don't know that this is like a widespread status symbol thing, but I do think that the argument gains traction when it comes to productivity, because people who are sober are seen as more productive and higher achievers because they're associated with traits like discipline and focus. I actually saw somebody on IG that said, they always assume that if a person has too many drinks at like a happy hour or a cocktail party, that they just don't have a busy morning in front of them. And they weren't saying that like as a flex, like, oh, you get to sleep in. It's like, oh, you must have nothing going on in your life, because how else would you be drinking like this? Which is interesting. That's a shift.
Yeah, it is. And I can understand why. I understand both sides of that, right? Because I can I'm being honest. And to your point about this being probably one of the more vulnerable episodes that we've ever done, I certainly remember having moments where I would look at someone who's like, oh, it must be nice because I've got a busy morning ahead of me. And so, I'm going to pass on having another round or two. But I've never thought about sobriety as a status symbol. That's certainly not one of the motivations for why I started to explore sober curiosity.
It checks the boxes. I mean,
it
it's
does.
Aspirational. It's hard to achieve.
Yeah.
It's associated with some deep-seated religious context.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. But I didn't either. I thought it was actually an anti-status symbol.
Yeah. So in terms of, why I think this might be the case, I think there are a couple of reasons why that aren't necessarily a reflection of it just being something that people think they can do that might earn them a certain level of status. I think part of it is just demographic shifts, and I've got some data to back this up. So there's a Gallup poll that basically says a significant driver for why we're seeing such declines in alcohol drinking is because of how diverse young people are. Specifically, non-white Americans have persistently been less likely to drink than white Americans, and this is true across all age groups, but the percentage of 18 to 34-year-olds who are Black, Hispanic, Asian, or another racial minority has nearly doubled over the past 2 decades. And so if it's not a part of the culture and there are more of those kinds of people, naturally you're going to see a bit of a shift in terms of the consumption of these types of products. I think the second one is just general health concerns. I know that was definitely a motivating force for me, but I think because of the coronavirus and COVID and that period really kind of forcing everyone to be a bit more mindful of their health in general and understanding that there might be some very real costs associated with some of these bad habits, especially when you think about long COVID and this like greater recognition that, hey, like that might not just be like a lingering cough that you have. Like that might actually be a bit more serious. I think all of those things, are forcing a lot of people to be a bit more mindful of what they're putting into their bodies and how they're treating their bodies. But I think the third one, in terms of why this trend is gaining so much traction, is almost one that I think people have forgotten about. And I think has a lot to do with the fact that cannabis, in many ways, has replaced alcohol, right? It's kind of said, you know what? This is in vogue now. People prefer these kinds of products or these kinds of vices. And I think that without question, because of the growth that we've seen, not just even in terms of legalization, but in terms of the different types of ways that people can consume cannabis.
Oh, yeah.
and the direct tie to cannabis is almost like a bit of a no-brainer, just a preferential, vice than alcohol, because there is arguably zero, if I'm not mistaken, health benefit associated with consuming alcohol. Whereas we know that there's now continued evidence that cannabis does have legitimate health benefits. And so I think all of those things combined have contributed to why we're seeing such declines. And I think some of these things we can even say that, I'm in line with that, right? I remember also having concerns about my health, which we'll get into in just a couple of minutes.
I think the accessibility of cannabis has certainly contributed to some of the erosion. I mean, you can get CBD in just about anything. You can get it in your latte, you can get it in your massage, you can find it in the grocery store.
Yeah.
And then, there's different strains you can get across the board. So I want to talk about what started our journey. My journey started back in 2020. I had just quit my job. We had gotten our book deal, and then the world shut down. Yeah. And during those 6 weeks of quarantine, when our 2-year-old, he was barely 2.
Yeah.
He was a little
probably
over
2.5.
Yeah, 2.5. He was almost 3. When our almost 3-year-old was at home with us for 6 weeks, I drank like every day was Saturday. I just didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't have the structure of a job. I was parenting all day with minimal tools because our home was not set up for a child care situation.
Yeah, we were setting it up as we went.
Yeah.
Like a lot of people.
Like a lot of people, right? We didn't have desks. We didn't have much. And I was drinking every single day. It was the way that I ended the day. It was the way that I signaled like, whew, we made it. And then I did that until my body eventually hit the limit. And everybody was drinking back then. If you look at the stats, there's like a peak where everybody was drinking more. But women, and particularly moms, were down bad during the pandemic. The stats say that women increased their heavy drinking days by 41% compared to before the pandemic during, that 6 or 7 week period. And I remember writing a life update for our blog in June of 2020. And I was talking about how my drinking was still within the socially accepted pandemic norms, but that it was taking a toll on my mental and physical health. So fast forward to the end of that year, we decided that we were going to do dry January. I remember waking up on New Year's Day with like a headache because we had gone in the night before for New Year's Eve. And we decided that we were going to do dry January. And to prepare for that, I started reading this book by Holly Whitaker called Quit Like a Woman.
Yep.
And that book broke my brain in the best possible way. I actually did a YouTube video on it a while ago if you're listening and want to hear my review. But the short version is Holly Whitaker managed to contextualize alcohol within our broader society, and it really helped me understand why I was struggling to change my habits so much, even though I wanted to. And it also reminded me of why I struggled with money before I got a grip on that. It is really difficult to find places to cut your budget if you don't understand how consumerism works. Yeah. The same is true for alcohol. If you don't understand all of the external programming on top of the internal neurological effects, it's going to be really hard to cut back. You need more than just willpower. You need an entire paradigm shift and a whole new toolkit. And in a lot of cases, a different community and support system.
Yeah, I remember those days vaguely. I certainly remember when you decided to write about it on a blog post. I definitely remember the period of getting the deal. And it was just like this weird time period between signing the deal and knowing that contractually there were some deadlines that we needed to meet while the world was falling apart. And there was just so much uncertainty because we legitimately at that time did not know what was happening. Everything was shutting down. Jobs were closing, offices, daycares, everything. To your point, our child was home. We didn't really know what was happening. And so I think like a lot of people, the alcohol was there. And it was one of the few things that a lot of people leaned into and said, you know what, I definitely don't have to go to work in the morning, right. And so I think I am going to enjoy a little bit more. And I would imagine some people enjoyed it a little bit more than others. I don't know that my journey started specifically. I guess I could pinpoint it to when we did Dry January. And that's only because I know that I'd heard of Dry January before. The idea of doing it had never crossed my mind. And that's not because I love alcohol and drinking so much. I think a lot of that with respect to my relationship with drinking has just to do with like my upbringing. And I don't mean that in terms of growing up in New York or being Jamaican. It's more so around my culture as a hospitality, food and beverage guy. Like that is at the heart of what I do. During that time and the formation of my professional identity, food and wine is a part of who I am. It's who I am. It's what I do. And so the idea of not drinking alcohol almost felt like it's like being a podcaster, but I don't do microphones. Like,
right.
I don't do that part, but I'm a part of the pod. It was like, well, how could you really be in this industry? And so that was part of the reason why I had just never even really entertained it. And even just taking that a step further and using the word entertain, like entertaining was something that I really take pride in doing. It's something that we do really well and enjoy doing. And alcohol plays a role in that. Even when I think about just our personal life and so many of the opportunities that we've had to travel the world and, even as business owners celebrating big wins, like it's very much a part of the culture. It was a part of our lifestyle. It was a part of our story. And so imagining a world where that element wasn't there just seemed unfamiliar and unnecessary to me. But it really wasn't until I had a doctor visit. This was like a general checkup, and grateful first of all for healthcare. I think I've had that conversation with myself several times this year. But going to the doctor and having him ask me like, "How often are you drinking?" And I'm not gonna lie, in that moment, I felt like they're collecting data.
Yeah.
I felt like in that moment, they're collecting data.
And they're going to dismiss any symptom you have based on this.
However I respond is going to be a part of some study that then pops up and is a part of a Kaiser Permanente article on the increase of alcohol drinking during the pandemic. But I appreciated it because in that moment, I just made the decision to be honest. And I could not or would not ignore some of the negative things that I was seeing popping up on my charts. I'm too smart of a person, I guess, or too rational to be able to say, do you feel like lying to yourself some more, or do you want to do something about it?
Right.
There was a direct connection between my habits and the results that I was seeing. And so when I thought about that, I thought about the fact that our son was getting a little older at that point, and I needed to be a bit more present. I certainly needed to have boatloads more patience to be the kind of parent that I wanted to be. And even as I thought about our relationship, because there was very much a time where I thought like, wow, if we don't have that, then what are we going to do on Fridays and Saturdays? And it was like, yeah, you owe it to yourself. Like you're far more creative than that, dude. You know what I mean? Like you can come up with several other things that you could be doing that don't revolve around or are centered around drinking copious amounts of alcohol. And so for me, that would be the motivations, the original motivations for why I decided to explore sober curiosity. But I give you a lot of credit because we lived together and you explored it a whole year before I did. It really wasn't until...
Well, we were both kind of going in and out of it. I think we both hit a similar intervention in January of 2021.
Yeah.
After we did Dry January. Yours was in the doctor's office, but mine was honestly in my journal. I was thinking about the book release. I was thinking about the business opportunities that we had, the position and the advantage that I had carved out for myself from all of these good decisions. And the two things that I kept telling myself, the first one was, I've been hearing about my potential all my life. I can't wait to meet her. And the second one was, I don't want to have the year that I think I'm going to have and be too hungover to remember it. And those two things were my motivations to try something different.
Yeah.
But like you said, it was not easy. After the quarantine ended, we were trying to get a grip on our drinking even in 2020, but then summer came along and then the holidays and then we decided to do Dry January in 2021. And even that led to some back and forth and sliding because there are some downsides to it. So I want to make sure that we don't just talk about the upside, the parts that we benefit from. I want to make sure that we cover the hard parts and the parts that we didn't like of this journey.
Yeah, let's do it.
And I'll start because I have a list. So the first one is just the language around it. Holly Whitaker talks about this a lot in the book around, we only know alcoholics and non-alcoholics. We do not address the full spectrum of drinking and the volume in which you drink. I also hate the term mocktail. Like I prefer spirit free or just plain old non-alcoholic. Right. Occasionally I'll use 0 proof, but I hate that I feel pressured to label my drink as something different or label myself as like this type of person.
Yeah.
I hate that mocktails are priced the same as cocktails. And a lot of restaurants have expanded their menu to include zero proof drinks, but they're not cheaper. They're the same price as a cocktail.
Yeah.
So I've learned to go with tonic and...
It's like a sober tax, sober penalty.
Right, for no reason. Like there's no alcohol. I mean, I understand that the ingredients may be small batch and, you know, there's still cost to that, but there isn't really a cost savings if you're trying to match the same flavor profile.
Yeah.
So I go with tonic and lime or like bitters and soda. Now, I thought the social implications would actually be really bad because to your point about identity and professional identity, I also have an identity as a bit of a party girl, as a bit of somebody who likes to go out and have a good time and enjoy a cocktail. But the social implications haven't been as hard as I thought they would be. And they've actually decreased as the urges to drink have weakened. It helps that I have friends who were on a similar journey. Yeah. I have one friend who was going through a really tough breakup, and so she wanted to eliminate all of the numbing agents from her life as a part of her healing process. And then I have another friend who was just dealing with some mental health stuff, and so, you know, she knew it wasn't a good mix. So it helped that I had friends.
Yep.
I also worried about you and I read a lot about couples who go sober together. And not surprisingly, the research is very similar to the research around retirement. If you can do it together and stick with it, it increases your chances of success. But if you do it separately, it's much harder and increases your chances of separation.
Yeah.
Which was a scary thought. I read this one article and she was like, be prepared to meet your partner's monsters once you both go sober because you've been numbing out the whole time. I was worried that we were going to fight more. But I think for us, our biggest challenge was establishing that we may have different finish lines. Like you've been very clear that you're on a journey to sobriety and I'm not there yet. I just wanted my relationship to alcohol to be like my relationship to cake. Like it's an occasional indulgence. It's something that I have every once in a while, but I don't expect it at the end of every single day. Now, I may get to wanting to be fully sober naturally the same way that I arrived to financial independence after we finished paying off all of the debt. And I got to experience the world with like these fresh incentives and motivations, but I'm just not there yet. I really like the flexible gray area of sober curiosity. I like just being more mindful.
Yeah. So one, I appreciate you being vulnerable. And again, like this is a very real conversation. Some of these things we've spoken about, some of these things I'm just learning for the first time. But I think that to me was a big part of it. And as you were speaking, it made me think about I think the clearest parallel that I could find was more so around weight loss, right? Like when one person, if you got two people that are married, they're together, and one person is really committed to this thing and the other person isn't, not so much, it's that much harder, right? Like, and I don't know all the data, but like, it's very, very similar to that where like, it's just easier when you've got two people, they're supporting each other and they're kind of going in the same direction. They may not necessarily get to the finish line at the same time, but at a minimum, they're walking in the same direction. You also mentioned something around having other people. And I think very similar to other things that we know that we've tried to pursue, that plays a really, really important role. And for me, it was being able to see people that we've gotten to know over the last couple of years. And so shout out to Lynette and Earl. They, without question, and in many ways are role models to us. I have to give a shout out to my friend Rich, our friend Rich, I should say, who has really just been leading the way. And we actually interviewed him on the Cashing Out podcast. He was very open and honest about his journey. We spoke a little bit about the money that he saved, the motivations, all of those things. We have a friend, Steve, who's doing incredible things. He's also, I think, probably just one of the most casual examples of it too. And I think that's what really motivated me, not to take anything away from him or my other friend Hazza or any of the other guys that I can point to. But Steve in particular didn't even really talk about it, right? Like it really wasn't until you mentioned it, you wouldn't know that he doesn't drink, right? Because to your point, he's still out there. He's still having fun. It's not until you actually say you guys want to go to a bar. He's like, yeah, that's cool. But I don't, just so you know, I don't really drink.
Yeah.
And it's not a big thing. And that was something.
And he barely says that. He just says, okay, cool. And then when he gets to the bar, orders, a water. I mean, not a water. Steve drinks interesting things, but
he does. But I think what was, what I liked about that, and again, speaking to what may have made me hesitate from doing it before, and I would imagine a lot of people watching and listening are in the same boat, And I called it, I posted this on Instagram a couple of weeks ago, but like I didn't want to be a sober dick. Like there are sober dicks out there that like it becomes the core part of everything that they do, and they center everything that they do around their sobriety. And I get that if that's their path, that's their thing, but to me, because that's what I saw, I said, well, I don't want to be that. Therefore, sobriety wasn't for me. It's a very short-sighted way of looking at it. And I didn't realize or have an appreciation for the full spectrum of it until after we started having those conversations. But the last thing that I'll say, because it was a really big step for me, was realizing, like, at what point do you think you need help? And I think that's where a lot of people struggle, is because they think that, well, I'm pretty good. I'm pretty well disciplined. I can stop whenever I want to stop. I just don't feel like stopping. And I believed that about myself as well. And that's when I actually realized how deeply ingrained those habits were, because there were a couple of times where I tried to stop and I was not able to, or like there was a few nights I was like, you know what, I'm not going to drink tonight just because I just didn't feel like it. And I wasn't quite able to keep that commitment to myself. And that kind of scared me. Because that made me say, okay, is it you? Is it that monster that's inside just kind of, creeping in? And I did not like that feeling. And I knew that if I succumbed to that it would unravel so many of the other things that we had going on. And so I decided to pay for an app called Reframe. And this by no way is a paid endorsement of the product. I am recommending it for anyone that needs some help. But the app Reframe was really, really helpful for me because it was all about micro learning. And you basically every single day commit to 5 minutes to read about a particular subject. It could be how the brain works. It could be how the body or the gut works. It could be the role that alcohol plays in mental health, or any number of those things for that day. But you download the app, you create your profile, and they basically curate this micro learning journey for you, where you're learning a little bit more, you're inputting information so that you're being honest and tracking how much you're drinking, creating your goals. And through all of that, really anytime you want, you can go in there and you can see how much better your sleep has likely improved based on how consistent you've been. You can certainly see and quantify how much you've saved in terms of money since you started your journey. And it's just really, really interesting insights. You can see how much fewer calories you've consumed just from doing those things. And for me, I know we opened this podcast episode talking about money. I don't even use the app every single day anymore. I think it's done its job. But the last time I checked, I want to say that number was just around $3,000. And that was just me.
Right.
So that would not be including any of the alcohol that you would have consumed. I would imagine there's some overlap there. But at a minimum, there's $3,000 saved. There's thousands of calories. There's hundreds of improved hours of sleep. But for me, most importantly, there's just so much more energy, patience and tolerance, and improved mood and ability to deal with conflict as it comes. And I think for me, a really great sense of accomplishment in a way that I don't know that I've had in a really, really long time. Like I've done some amazing things. We've done some amazing things over the last couple of years, but few things gave me a greater sense of accomplishment than knowing that I was able to kick this habit and find this new normal for myself.
Yeah, I think from a behavioral standpoint, it reminds me of when we first cut the cord. Now, we OG cord cutters. Like, we cut the cord 10, 12 years ago, like way before. Like, I think the only product in the market at that time was the Apple TV, and it had just launched. There was no Fire Stick, no Roku, and if there were, they didn't have nearly the budget or the capabilities to plug into any TV. Like you either had to have a smart TV or you had to buy this device, and your TV had to be new enough that would accommodate it. That's the biggest behavioral change, is just like relearning your habits around consumption. But I would say internally, the biggest shift that I can compare it to is when I got off of hormonal birth control. I remember that process of detoxing myself from that chemical. And, alcohol it's not the same, but it feels the same, the clarity that I have. And going back to the financial aspect, I've tried to calculate this several times. And I think on the low end, I'd estimate that we save somewhere between $400 to $600 a month.
Yeah.
But when you count travel and holidays and those occasions where we tend to overserve
little bit more.
ourselves. Yeah,
Yeah.
I tend to be a little overserved. It could easily get up to $1,000 in certain periods. But it's really telling that David Bach wrote the latte factor instead of the liquor factor, because a $5 latte every morning seems tiny compared to the $17 cocktail,
Yep.
the $8 beer, the $40 bottle of liquor, or $20 bottle of wine. And I think for me, the biggest surprise has been the ripple effects of spending because we've drank less. Drinking is very similar to commuting in that a lot of the costs are hidden until you stop doing it.
Yep.
For us, it's been less Uber rides, less junk food, less late night snacking, less tipsy scrolling and random online purchases.
Speaking for yourself. Go ahead.
And more reading, more watching movies, more getting in touch with hobbies and discovering other forms of relaxation. I literally keep a list of other ways to relax because I've had to disassociate alcohol from relaxation. I tell myself I can absolutely have alcohol when I want to, as long as I'm not attaching it to this idea of it relaxing me.
Yeah.
I need to have it because I want to taste it, because it's going to enhance my meal, just because I want it, but not because of this idea that it's going to relax me. I have a list of things that do that instead.
I know I mentioned the act of kind of getting a better hold or sense of control over the amount that I drink. And I think that number was, I'd set a maximum to 5 a week. And now I even struggle. I shouldn't say struggle to get to, because I'm not like trying to get to it. But like, really, it's really around 4, like max. And it just kind of depends on the kind of weekend that I'm having. I may just skip it altogether. But we talk about the sleep benefits. That's not something that I really ever struggled with. But I definitely think I've seen some improvement in my sleep, certainly since I've been on this journey. But I think the biggest things in terms of measurables, aside from the immediate financial benefit, has been the weight loss. And what's particularly interesting to me is that I've always in my head told myself that I needed this combination of like constantly being in like really great physical like routine coupled with like nutrition. And that's where you're really going to see the biggest results. But as I really started to think about my own journey, it's actually never worked that way. It's always been like, actually, no, you're going to really excel in one or the other, and the other one, like, not so much. And this case was no different. It was because I've not been nearly as physically active as I used to be. And I've had a massive, I think from my peak, I'm down 15 pounds, even though I've not worked out nearly as much or as aggressively as I did when I'm at my peak. And that's something that I thought was really, really interesting because it just helped me better understand my body and what I needed to do. But from an emotional standpoint, even when I think about little things, like just the other day, I was working on this workbook. Our son's in the first grade. He's got his general first grade workbook, and then he's got this math workbook that we have. And I've walked him through every single one of those things. We're done with the first grade book already, and we're working our way through the math book. And we're about 60, 70% done. And now he's starting to get really, really excited by the idea that he's gotten so much better. Because they're, just like adults, right? Like when you get 2/3 to the way through a book, and you look at that problem and you're like, there's no way I'm ever going to know how to do that. And he had that moment where he realized, wow, I remember when I didn't know how to do this. And I'm not taking anything away from him, but going back to the levels of patience that I have now that I don't know that I would have had before, going back to the level of discipline to do it, I don't know that I would have had that had I not been able to reach this new place of health and overall wellness. And I just think it created a greater capacity for me to be present, not just as a parent, but also as a husband, as a business owner, etc. And so I want to be, I know we're eventually going to wrap this up, but I'll just say this. I do not want to judge anyone that might be struggling. I'm certainly not saying, wow, we are in some ways.
Yeah, we have not reached enlightenment.
Yeah, we have.
That may not even be the goal.
But I do want to, if you're like me and you're out there, you're listening and you're watching, and you have at some point wondered why so many people who's kind of start out in the personal finance world, and I think JL actually talks about this in his book, Pathfinders, but why they start out in the personal finance world and then kind of graduate eventually into these other things, is because it's all kind of connected. right? When your life is not completely obsessed with work, you still have energy, you still have attention span, and you start to look inward. And in that moment, you start to say, I wonder how I can apply all the excellence and the creativity and the work ethic that I apply to my life over here, and like put it over here. And I wonder what would happen to my life or to my health. And I think it's just a bit of a natural process. And I think that's kind of where we are, which is very, very interesting. And so for the people who are out there that might be a little cautious and say, well, this kind of feels a little woo-woo or something, I hope you get here at some point, and I hope you find that level of clarity. If you don't, that's okay too, but I hope you do, especially if you're thinking about it, because I think for me, it has been incredibly wonderful. And it's not something that we talk about often, but flat out, like there's just something to it, right? If you consume less of this thing that costs money, you're going to save some money, right? So that's the lesson. If you want the quick clip, that's something that should be on the table.
Don't get a side hustle. Just quit drinking.
That's what I'm saying. Like it's one or the other. Those two things could have just as much of an effect, but one of them, I think, has a greater potential to create this ripple effect. Yeah. And this is one that I think we can speak to for sure.
That's actually the perfect segue to what I was going to end on. It's this idea that I saw from Nat Eliason about quality of life. And honestly, I think quality of life is going to be a recurring theme for me and us this year because
I think so too.
Personally, I'm trying to define what it means to me. It's one of those vague metrics that people reference all of the time, but haven't necessarily taken the time to define. And I just don't think that we talk about it enough. I don't think that we really take the time to define what it is. Anyway, Nat wrote this article about quality of life, and he talks about how most of the quality of life improvements have known costs, but unknowable benefits. So if you think about the big quality of life improvements, everything from exercising to being in a committed relationship or maybe even getting married, having a kid, drinking less, all of these things make the cost of pursuing them known and upfront, but the benefits are more hidden until you try it. Yeah. And he points out this paradox that oftentimes the more beneficial the change would be in your life, the less obvious it is to you. So if you are someone who knows that going outside is beneficial, maybe you read it, you develop an awareness that sunlight and fresh air is good for you. If you don't go outside right now, if you spend zero time going outside, the benefits of doing so are less obvious to you because you don't have this reference point. You don't have this moment where it's like, I remember being outside and it really enhancing my mood. The same is true for investing. If you're not investing on a regular basis and you listen to me and Julien tell you every week that the benefits of doing so are so great, it's going to be less obvious to you until you start investing, even if you know and believe that these benefits exist. So I think that's why I like the curious part of the sober curious label, even though I hate labels. For me, it's a reminder to stay curious about the things that I haven't tried yet, because they may unlock these huge quality of life leaps. And the idea that I don't know what I don't know is actually motivating to me.
And I can attest to it. Right? When I think about how much more creative I've been this year, I attribute a significant degree of that to not drinking. When I think about the gains that we've made as a couple, as a business, with our son, as we mentioned earlier, all of those things, I would be lying to myself if I could not draw a direct connection to drinking. And when I started, I believed that might be a benefit, but I could not have been able to clearly say oh no, you will think that much more clearly. Yeah. And you just having this much more patience and tolerance and willingness to find a balance or a better solution is going to lead to all of these greater outcomes. And in addition to that, you just have more money in the bank. It seems overwhelmingly simple. But yeah, I wanted to make sure that we spoke about this, and I'm glad that we did, because I think, this isn't necessarily for the people who have big problems and it's pretty clear that they've got, a monster on their back that they can't seem to shake off. It's more so for the people who I think were like us, who have had a casual relationship with alcohol, but didn't quite have the capacity or the time or the level of motivation to say, hey, I wonder what would happen if I just eliminated it from my life, or to even ask the question, what role does it really play in my life? Like, what value does it add to my life? And how might I be able to eliminate that without it creating this kind of negative ripple effect around all these other things? Because I think that's a big part of the fear around why so many people either don't identify with these ideas or don't even think to remove alcohol. And so my hope for those of you who are listening and watching, that this is the little nudge that you needed. And I hope it just kind of makes this way of life feel a little bit more palatable for you. And hopefully it's a thing that, makes you say, hey, I think I can do this too.
Think I can, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can.
Damn, man.
All right, y'all. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Rich and Regular podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a 5-star review or drop a comment below and keep the conversation going. We will see y'all next week. If you like videos like this and want to see more, make sure you click subscribe and turn on notifications.